Whispering Shadows. Chapter 1, The New Beginning. The winding road to Blackthorn Hall was obscured by tendrils of fog drifting across the moors. Dr. Sarah Wells tightened her grip on the steering wheel, periodically glancing at her daughter Emily in the passenger seat. The teenager stared silently out the window, her haunted expression mirrored in the glass. Sarah knew this move was necessary, a chance to start anew after her husband's untimely death. But gazing upon the decaying facade of Blackthorn Hall, she felt the first pangs of doubt. Was this truly the right decision? She worried that the manor's isolation would only worsen Emily's melancholic state, not improve it. As the car rolled to a stop in the gravel driveway, Emily finally broke her silence. "It looks different than I imagined," she said faintly. Sarah forced a smile. "I know it needs some work, but I think in time we can make it feel like home." Emily nodded without conviction. They exited the car, the crunch of gravel loud in the unnatural stillness surrounding the manor. Two weathered oak doors served as the main entrance beneath an ornate archway. Sarah dug out the antique iron key she had received from the real estate agent. With effort, she turned it in the rusty keyhole until the lock clanked open. The doors swung inward with an ominous creak. Stepping into the foyer, Sarah was greeted by a stale, dusty air. She flicked on a nearby light switch to no avail. "Of course, the power's off," she muttered. "I'll have to call the utility company." Emily hovered close behind her mother, peering hesitantly into the gloomy interior. The little natural light afforded by the dusty windows revealed an elaborate yet dilapidated grand staircase and faded damask wallpaper curling at the edges. Sarah's voice echoed eerily through the emptiness. "Let's explore a bit while there's still daylight." They made their way through a maze of rooms on the first floor, many still containing remnants of antique furniture draped in yellowed sheets. A formal dining room with a long oak table had an entire wall occupied by a floor-to-ceiling cabinet of expensive china, now blanketed in a layer of dust. In what appeared to be a sitting room, the eerie sight of a rocking chair seemed to be gently swaying of its own accord, until Sarah realized it was only a trick of the dim light filtering through moth-eaten curtains. Turning down a long hallway adorned with darkened sconces and threadbare carpet, Sarah paused before a painting that caught her eye. It depicted a severe-looking young woman in a black Victorian-era dress, her pale features framed by long, raven-dark hair. The woman's piercing eyes followed Sarah as she stepped closer to examine the gilt nameplate on the frame, Lady Eleanor Blackthorn. A shiver went down Sarah's spine as she met the painted figure's intense gaze. There was profound sadness in those eyes, mixed with something harder to define. Anger? Madness? Or was it a mere trick of the brushstrokes? "Mom, look!" Emily's hushed voice broke Sarah's transfixion. She turned to see Emily pointing at a narrow doorway. Stepping through it, they found themselves in a small octagonal room, every inch of wall space occupied by overflowing bookshelves. "It appears to be a library," remarked Sarah. She scanned the leather-bound spines, bearing titles that suggested histories, folklore, and esoteric topics. Cobwebs stretched across the shelves like gossamer nets. Emily reached for a dusty tome bound in faded crimson leather. She gingerly opened it, squinting at the ornate script. "Listen to this," she said. The manor known as Blackthorn Hall has long been regarded with suspicion and fear by the local villagers. Strange lights are seen at night, and unexplained cries echo on the moors. The river is said to turn blood red on occasions when a resident meets an untimely end. She looked up at her mother. "Seems like this place has some creepy stories about it." Sarah frowned. She hadn't known the full history of the manor when she purchased it, desperate for an affordable and secluded refuge. Now she wondered what they had stepped into. The light from the windows faded to dusk. "We should head to town and find some dinner," said Sarah, gently taking the book from Emily and replacing it on the shelf. Let this just be our first impression. I'm sure we'll settle in soon enough. But as she led her daughter out of the shadowy manor, Sarah took one last look at the portrait of Lady Eleanor, whose eyes followed her still. She shook off the sense of unease and headed out into the encroaching night. Tomorrow, the real work would begin of making Blackthorn Hall their home. Chapter 2, Nightmares Unleashed. That night, Emily tossed and turned, unable to find restful sleep in the unfamiliar manor. Outside, the wind howled across the moors, making the walls creak eerily. Each small sound put Emily's nerves on edge. Finally, in the early hours just before dawn, exhaustion claimed her. But her slumber was far from peaceful. Emily opened her eyes to find herself not in bed, but wandering the empty halls of Blackthorn Hall. Pale moonlight filtered in through the windows, casting ghostly shadows that moved and stretched ominously. "Mom." Emily's voice echoed down the corridors. No response came. She walked on, her footsteps unnaturally loud on the scuffed wooden floors. The manor seemed endless, with every turn leading to an identical decaying hallway. A scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor, arose from the darkness behind her. Emily's heart seized with fear. She broke into a run, taking random turns in an attempt to escape the unseen presence. Up ahead, she spotted a doorway with warm light emanating from it. If she could just reach it. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream rang out, shattering the silence. It was her mother's voice, twisted in abject terror and pain. Emily froze, then turned back the way she had come. The dragging sounds were louder now, closer. "Mom! I'm coming!" Emily ran headlong down the hallway, no longer caring what evil pursued her. She had to reach her mother. Just when the scraping sounds were close enough to touch, Emily yanked open a door and stumbled into blinding daylight. She sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding. Morning light filtered in through the curtains of the unfamiliar bedroom in Blackthorn Hall. The scream still echoed in Emily's mind. She leapt from bed and threw open the door. "Mom," she called out, rushing down the hall to her mother's room. Sarah was just emerging, still in her nightgown, her hair disheveled. Seeing her daughter's panic-stricken face, Sarah rushed forward. "Emily, what's wrong?" Emily collapsed into her mother's embrace. You were in trouble. Something was after you." Haltingly, she recounted the nightmare. Sarah stroked her daughter's hair soothingly. "It was just a bad dream. I'm fine, see?" She met Emily's eyes. "This old house probably stirred up your imagination. But it wasn't real." Emily nodded, trying to calm her frayed nerves. But she couldn't shake the chilling certainty that the scream had been real. Over the next week, Emily struggled to adjust to her new home. She wandered the manor and the overgrown grounds listlessly, unable to quell her unease. At night, the nightmares continued, growing darker and more vivid. Shadowy forms and strange whispers filled her dreams. She saw glimpses of a ghostly woman wandering the halls, her face obscured beneath a black veil. And always, she heard her mother's terrified screams echoing from a distance. Dark circles formed beneath Emily's eyes. Her complexion grew wan and sickly. When Sarah asked her about it, Emily downplayed the dreams as best she could, not wanting her mother to worry. "It's just trouble getting used to this new place," she claimed with a forced smile. "I'll be all right." But the nightly torment continued chipping away at Emily's psyche. She dreaded falling asleep, never knowing what horrors awaited. One rainy afternoon, Emily explored the overgrown gardens behind the manor, needing solitude and fresh air to clear her mind. As she wandered farther from the house, the wind picked up. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Emily hardly noticed, lost in her own troubled thoughts, when a gnarled hand clamped down on her shoulder. She cried out in alarm, whirling around to see an elderly man with piercing eyes peering at her from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Sorry to startle you, miss," he said in a thick rural accent. "I saw you from the road and thought I'd come check if you were all right." Emily's heartbeat slowed from its panicked pace. "I'm fine, just got lost in thought." She studied the old man's deeply lined face. "Do I know you?" "Daniel Whitlock, at your service," he said with a bow of his head. "I live just down the way. And you must be the daughter of the newcomer to Blackthorn Hall." Emily nodded hesitantly. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "You look unwell, if you don't mind my saying." He leaned closer, scrutinizing her pale face. "Haven't been sleeping, I take it? Having bad dreams?" Emily instinctively wrapped her arms around herself. How could this stranger possibly know about her nightmares? She took a step back. "I should get back to the house." Keeping a wary eye on Daniel, she started walking rapidly towards the manor. He called after her, "Best be on your guard, miss. This house doesn't take kindly to newcomers." Emily quickened her pace, not stopping till she was inside with the doors barred. Through the window, she saw no sign of Daniel Whitlock. Still, his words lingered uneasily in her mind. That night, the nightmares descended with a vengeance. Chapter 3: The Reclusive Historian. Over the next few days, Emily found her thoughts consumed by the strange encounter with Daniel Whitlock. She had told her mother about it in passing, but Sarah seemed preoccupied trying to make Blackthorn Hall habitable. He was probably just a lonely old man curious about new faces, Sarah had dismissed when Emily mentioned his cryptic warnings. This isolation can make people eccentric. But Emily remained unsettled. How had Daniel known she was having nightmares? His weathered face and intense gaze lingered in her mind. Emily took to wandering the moors while her mother busied herself with long-neglected household projects, needing solace from both the nightmares and the claustrophobic atmosphere inside Blackthorn Hall. The boggy landscape looked bleak under the overcast sky. Craggy outcroppings and the ruins of ancient stone walls jutted out of the rolling mist. She pulled her coat tighter against the chill wind. In the distance, Emily spotted a small, ramshackle cottage nestled between two hills. A thin wisp of smoke rose from its crooked chimney. Before she realized it, her feet had carried her to the front gate. Emily stood peering down the overgrown path at the humble homestead. The front door creaked open, and there stood Daniel Whitlock, gnarled cane in hand. "Well, if it isn't the newcomer from the manor," he called in his reedy voice. "What brings you this way, lass?" Emily hesitated. "I was just out walking the moors." Her voice trailed off as Daniel gestured her down the path. "Come in for some tea and a chat. These old bones could use the company." Curiosity overpowered apprehension, and Emily soon found herself seated in Daniel's cramped kitchen across from his piercing gaze. He poured 2 chipped mugs full of steaming tea. "Now then, what questions do you have for old Daniel Whitlock?" he asked, peering over his mug at Emily. She gathered her courage. "How did you know I've been having nightmares?" Daniel raised one bushy eyebrow. "My dear, Blackthorn Hall has been casting its shadow over these parts for centuries. And in all that time, no newcomer has ever slept soundly within its walls." Emily shivered, hands tightening around the warm mug. "But what you likely don't know," Daniel continued, "is that the manor has a long and bloody history, stretching back over 500 years. He took a long sip of tea. "The Blackthorns were once the preeminent family in this region, until a series of tragedies left the manor abandoned and forgotten. But the ghosts of the past still linger there." Daniel fixed Emily with an intense stare. "Mark my words, the darkness in that house has awoken. It will try to seep into your dreams and infect your mind." Emily's heart was racing. But why me? And what even is this darkness? Setting down his mug with a thump, Daniel leaned forward ominously. Have you seen her yet? The ghostly woman in black. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Flickering images from her nightmares flashed through her mind. The veiled woman wandering the halls, her pale hand reaching out. How could you know that? Emily stammered. Who is she? Daniel's face was grim. Her name is Lady Eleanor Blackthorne. In life, a great injustice was done to her within those walls. In death, she remains trapped there, full of rage and sorrow. Emily's mind was reeling. She recalled the portrait hanging in the dusty hallway, the sadness in the woman's eyes. Could these nightly horrors truly be the work of a vengeful ghost? Daniel went on. I've devoted years to studying the dark history of Blackthorne Hall. Eleanor Blackthorne's story is a tragic one. She was accused of witchcraft by her own brother, tortured and kept prisoner in the house until her death. Emily shuddered at the thought. Daniel nodded grimly. Her spirit remains, haunting those grounds. I've witnessed strange phenomena around the manor many times over the years. But none have suffered like those who dare spend the night within. He fixed Emily with a steady gaze. You and your mother are in grave danger, child. Emily stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her tea. I have to tell my mother about this. We have to leave Blackthorne Hall. Daniel held up a staying hand. Not so fast. Your mother will not easily believe what you have heard here today. We will need proof before she will be convinced. He began rummaging through a nearby trunk, muttering to himself. At last, he retrieved a thick leather-bound tome and presented it to Emily. Herein contains all I've learned about Blackthorne Hall over the decades. Read it carefully, and keep a log of any strange events you experience. Together, we may yet find a way to appease Eleanor's tormented soul. Emily clutched the heavy book. Thank you, Daniel. I hope you're not just some crazy old man. He chuckled dryly. Come see me again, and we shall see if you still believe I'm just a senile hermit after reading that. Emily hurried from the cottage, anxious to begin uncovering the true horror within Blackthorne Hall. Chapter 4: Haunting Manifestations. Over the next few days, Emily pored through the ancient tome Daniel had given her, reading by candlelight late into the night. Its brittle pages contained chilling accounts of the Blackthorne family's sordid history, sudden unexplained deaths, madness, and accusations of witchcraft. Emily learned that Lady Eleanor Blackthorne had been just 16 when her own brother, under the influence of religious fanaticism, had condemned her as a witch. He kept her locked away in the manor's north tower until she died in solitary confinement from causes unknown. The horrific tales made Emily view Blackthorne Hall in a new light. She began noticing odd phenomena that unsettled her. Strange scents wafted through the corridors, rotten flesh, blood, decay, and wildflowers all mingled together. Shadows danced and contorted into twisted shapes when she would pass by a candle's flickering flame. At night, Emily's dreams grew even more vivid and terrifying. Phantasmal figures wandered the halls just outside her field of vision, disappearing whenever she turned her head. She often awoke to find her sheets damp with some viscous, foul-smelling substance that defied explanation. Sarah dismissed Emily's accounts as overactive imagination and symptoms of grief. But the experiences only strengthened Emily's conviction that an evil presence haunted their new home. One night, Emily awoke with a start, her heart pounding. The bedroom air had taken on an unnatural chill. As she peered into the darkness, her breath caught in her throat. There in the corner stood a shadowy figure facing the wall. Though its back was to Emily, she could see the outline of a thin, feminine body draped in antiquated robes. Dark tendrils of hair dangled over a deathly pale neck. Emily opened her mouth to scream for her mother but found herself mute with terror. The apparition slowly turned to face her. As it did, the candles spontaneously roared to life, illuminating the ghost's ghastly countenance. Sunken eyes blazed from a face withered and wasted. Purplish lips were drawn back over blackened teeth. The stench of decay flooded Emily's senses. This rotting wraith could only be Eleanor's tortured spirit. "You shouldn't have come," a voice echoed inside Emily's mind. "Now you shall join the damned." With a shriek, Emily leapt from her bed, slamming her shoulder into the door frame in panic. She tore out of the room and down the stairs, not stopping until she was out the front door gasping for breath beneath the night sky. In the distance, a woman's high-pitched cackle reverberated through the stillness. Sarah came rushing out, clad in her nightdress. "Emily! What on earth is going on?" Haltingly, Emily recounted her encounter with the woman's vengeful ghost. But Sarah's expression only grew more concerned. "Sweetheart, you were having a severe nightmare. Come inside, I'll make you some warm milk." Emily shook her head vehemently. "No. I saw her, I swear it wasn't just some bad dream. Eleanor wants us dead." Sarah grasped her daughter's shoulders firmly. "Listen to me. There are no ghosts or witches. This house is just old and drafty. It's making you see things that aren't really there." Seeing her mother's skepticism, Emily grew frustrated. "If you won't believe me, we have to get help. I know someone else who understands what's happening here." Sarah raised a questioning eyebrow. "Daniel Whitlock, a local historian I met," Emily explained breathlessly. "He gave me a book about the horrific things that happened to Eleanor Blackthorne in this house. Her ghost is haunting us." With a sigh, Sarah replied, "All right, if it will ease your mind, I will speak with this man. But in the meantime, no more talk of ghosts. Let's focus on making happier memories here." Emily knew with chilling certainty that Eleanor's spirit would not rest until they exposed her vile injustice and acknowledged her vengeance. This was no childish fantasy, she had stared into the ghost's malevolent eyes. Somehow she had to convince her skeptical mother, before it was too late. Chapter 5, Uncovering Secrets. The next morning, Emily insisted that Sarah accompany her to meet with Daniel Whitlock. After her latest terrifying encounter, she knew time was running short to uncover the truth about Lady Eleanor's vengeful spirit. The day was overcast and dreary as mother and daughter made their way across the moors to the secluded cottage. Emily could sense her mother's unease, but she remained determined. Daniel welcomed them in, casting a knowing look at Emily. Over cups of tea, Emily recounted all they had experienced in Blackthorne Hall's haunted walls. Daniel listened intently, nodding gravely. "You were right to be wary of that accursed place," he said. "The manor holds many tragic secrets, but I believe we may yet lay Eleanor's tortured soul to rest." Sarah shifted in her chair. "Forgive me, but these all sound like irrational fears brought on by an impressionable mind," she said gently. Emily opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel raised a hand. "Your skepticism is understandable. But I implore you, allow me to show you the evidence I've gathered over the years." He retrieved the leather-bound tome and presented it to Sarah, along with his hand-scrawled notes, historical records, and occult books referencing the Blackthorne family and sightings of supernatural phenomena surrounding the manor. As Sarah reviewed the materials, her expression gradually shifted from doubt to intrigue. "Well, these certainly paint a frightening picture of the manor's past," she admitted. Daniel nodded. "With your permission, I'd like to perform a séance here tonight. If we can establish contact with Eleanor's spirit, perhaps she will reveal her intentions." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Emily's hopeful face. Setting down the book, she replied, "I need time to consider this further. But I will keep an open mind." On the walk back, Emily begged her mother to agree to the séance. We have to help Eleanor's spirit find peace. Otherwise she'll continue tormenting us forever. I understand you believe that, Sarah said gently. Just promise me you'll stay away from that attic where you saw the apparition. We can revisit this once I've done more research. That night, Emily lay awake listening to the howling wind outside. She knew Eleanor's ghost wandered the halls at this very moment, rage and anguish consuming her. Emily had to do something. Slipping out of bed, she crept up to the attic room that had once been Eleanor's prison. The door creaked open, and Emily peered into the darkness. Eleanor. I know you're here, she whispered. I want to help you. A blast of icy air extinguished Emily's candle, leaving her in pitch blackness. There came an unearthly shriek that raised the hair on Emily's neck. Scuttling sounds moved overhead in the rafters. You cannot help me. No one can, a voice rasped from the darkness. This house shall be your tomb. Emily's pulse quickened, but she stood her ground. Don't punish my mother and I for what your family did. If we work together, we can reveal the truth and set your spirit free. A spectral, glowing shape materialized before Emily. She could make out the ghostly form of a young woman in tattered white robes, her eyes burning with rage and madness. Lies, the spirit hissed. My prison stretches beyond this house into death's realm. I shall have my revenge upon all who dwell here. The temperature plunged around Emily as the spirit descended upon her. The girl's breath came in panicked gasps, her lungs tightening painfully in the icy air. Darkness crept into the edges of her vision. Then came her mother's voice, shouting her name. The spirit recoiled with a deafening shriek as Sarah burst in, flooding the attic with light. She grabbed Emily's shoulders, shock written on her face. What were you thinking coming here? Sarah cried. Emily, still struggling for breath, could only point a trembling finger at the spot where Eleanor's wraith had manifested. Sarah held her daughter tight, glaring around the empty attic as if to confront the ghost. For now, the spirit had retreated again into the shadows. But Emily knew with sinking certainty that the haunting was quickly escalating beyond their control. Eleanor had gone from dreams to manifesting physically. Her murderous intentions were clear. We have to get Daniel, Emily choked out. Before it's too late. Chapter 6, A Descent into Madness. Emily could see the doubt creeping back into her mother's eyes as Sarah led her trembling daughter out of the attic. But Emily knew what she had seen. Eleanor's ghost was no mere figment of her imagination. Sleep was out of the question after the terrifying encounter. Emily paced her bedroom as she waited desperately for dawn, listening for any anomalous sounds from the halls. But the manor remained eerily silent. When pale light finally filtered through the windows, Emily rushed to find her mother. Sarah sat nursing a cup of coffee, dark circles under her eyes betraying her own restless night. We have to get out of here, even if just for a little while, Emily pleaded. This house is slowly driving me mad. Sarah stirred her coffee silently before letting out a weary sigh. Perhaps you're right. I'm sure I can arrange for us to stay at an inn in town for a few nights. Emily sagged with relief. But as Sarah moved to make the call, a loud banging sounded from the front hall, followed by the ancient doors swinging open violently as if pushed by an invisible force. Sarah and Emily stared at each other in alarm before Sarah cautiously moved into the foyer. No one was there, but a cold, unnatural wind swept into the house, stirring up clouds of dust. Emily shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Eleanor was here with them now. The ghost had made it clear she would not let them abandon Blackthorn Hall so easily. The next few days passed in a blur. During the day, while Sarah busied herself around the house, Emily wandered the grounds in a fog, jumping at every snapped twig or rustle in the overgrown vegetation. At night, she lay awake gripped by a nameless dread, certain that if she let her eyes drift shut, the demonic ghost would be lying in wait for her. Her few periods of fitful sleep were plagued by feverish nightmares. She dreamt of walking through the manor's darkened halls endlessly, pursued by an unseen evil. No matter which way she turned, she found herself in the same shadowy corridor. Other times, she saw Eleanor's ghastly visage floating outside her bedroom window, beckoning Emily to join her in death. The spirit's vengeful whispers in her mind grew more insistent, commanding Emily to hurt herself and others. The frail barrier between her nightmares and waking hours gradually began to fray and unravel. Soon, Emily glimpsed Eleanor's ghost from the corner of her eye even while awake. The spirit trailed her as she wandered between rooms, always vanishing when stared at directly. Emily started at small noises and seeing movement in her peripheral vision. Her skin was icy to the touch, her nerves frayed. She stopped eating and refused to leave the house for fear of what she might encounter on the misty moors. Concerned by her daughter's deteriorating mental state, Sarah suggested bringing a psychologist from town to observe Emily. But at the mere mention of strangers in Blackthorn Hall, Emily flew into a panic. "No doctors," she shrieked. "They'll only try to discredit what's happening here. We need to get Daniel so he can banish this evil once and for all." "Sweetheart, you're unwell," Sarah pleaded. "Let me call someone who can help you." But Emily refused. In her paranoid state, she trusted no one outside Blackthorn Hall. Even her mother was beginning to seem foreign, an outsider who could not see the terror closing in around them. Late one night, Emily jolted awake convinced she heard her mother's agonized screams coming from somewhere in the lightless manor. Heart pounding, she grabbed the lantern by her bed and crept into the hallway. "Mom!" Emily's hoarse voice echoed down the empty corridors. No response came except the moan of the wind outside the manor walls. She stumbled along, lantern raised, calling out desperately. Rounding a corner, she came face to face with a gnarled, shadowy creature hunched on all fours. It skittered toward her, limbs cracking, flesh rotting and withered. A strangled gasp escaped Emily's lips as she backpedaled and lost her footing. The lantern fell from Emily's grip and shattered, plunging the hall once again into darkness. The thing pursued her on twisted limbs as she crawled away in blind terror. Where Eleanor's spirit had been haunting but vaguely human, this entity was something else entirely. Something inhuman and monstrously evil. At last Emily regained her feet and fled blindly through darkened corridors until she collided with a flesh and blood form, her mother. Sarah seized her shoulders. "What happened?" she cried, seeing her daughter's maddened state. "There was something." In the hall, Emily gasped between panicked sobs. "Not Eleanor this time, something worse." Sarah enveloped Emily in her arms, stroking her hair and murmuring soothing words until her daughter's cries subsided into whimpers. Emily clung to her mother desperately, all barriers dissolved in that moment. The haunting of Blackthorn Hall had finally reduced her to her most terrified and childlike self. "We're leaving this place," Sarah said firmly once Emily had calmed somewhat. "First thing in the morning. No more talk of ghosts or seances." Emily simply nodded, her energy spent. She allowed her mother to lead her back to bed where she immediately slipped into a deep but troubled sleep, praying she would wake to find Blackthorn Hall far behind them. The darkness of the house had left its scars, but perhaps somewhere beyond this cursed place hope still remained. Chapter 7, Confronting Eleanor. Morning light filtered into Emily's room, rousing her from a fretful sleep. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the memories of the night before came flooding back, the twisted creature stalking the halls, her mother's comforting embrace after. Emily hurried downstairs, where she found Sarah placing folded clothes into suitcases. Her mother glanced up, concern etched on her face. "Did you sleep at all?" Sarah asked, noting the dark circles ringing her daughter's eyes. Emily mutely shook her head. Sleep had been punctuated by nightmares of rotting hands dragging her into the darkness. Sarah gently grasped Emily's shoulders. It will get better once we've left this place. Start packing your bags, I want to be on the road by noon. Emily nodded and returned to her room. She began the familiar ritual of packing, all the while battling to keep images of the sinister entity she had glimpsed from her mind. She focused on thoughts of the sunny cottage by the sea her mother had described for their new home, far from this accursed place. The creak of a floorboard snapped Emily out of her reverie. She whirled around to see an ominous dark shape filling the doorway, the pale veil and billowing black robes marking it unmistakably as Eleanor's ghost. Emily froze in primal terror. The spirit glided into the room, an icy chill preceding it. You seek to leave this house, came the ghostly whisper inside Emily's mind. But I have laid claim to your souls. Emily found her voice. We don't want to hurt you, Eleanor. But your hatred is poisoning this place. Please, let us go. The temperature plunged. Silence, shrieked the wraith. You will never leave these walls. Emily's breaths came in panicked gasps as the ghost closed in. Then came a sound from downstairs, her mother calling her name. At the sound, Eleanor's spectre recoiled with a flash of seething anger. Before the spirit could regain its sinister composure, Emily dashed downstairs, taking the steps two at a time. She found her mother standing in the kitchen doorway, concern etched on her face. Emily. I've been looking everywhere for you. Emily hurried to her side. She's here, in my room, she cried. Eleanor's ghost tried to curse me. Sarah's expression hardened with resolve. She took Emily firmly by the hand. Come with me. It's time we confronted this, once and for all. Confused but trusting her mother, Emily followed Sarah to the attic room that had served as Eleanor's prison in life. Once inside, Sarah firmly closed the door behind them. She began lighting candles methodically, arranging them in a circle on the floor. Understanding slowly dawned on Emily. A séance? But I thought you needed to do more research. Sarah sighed. I can't bear to see you suffer another day in this place. If Eleanor is the cause, we must make her listen to reason before things get worse. Emily shivered at the memory of the twisted apparition from the night before. Whatever evil inhabited Blackthorn Hall, contacting Eleanor directly felt dangerous. But they were out of options. As dusk fell, Sarah and Emily seated themselves in the flickering candle ring. Clasping hands, they closed their eyes and Sarah began chanting words in Latin that Emily did not understand. Gradually, the temperature dropped until their breath came out in puffs of vapor. The candle flames elongated, their light dimming. Emily's palms grew icy and numb in her mother's grip. Then, a spectral voice spoke out of the darkness. Who dares summon me? Sarah responded in a steady tone. Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, I am Sarah Wells. My daughter, Emily, and I mean you no harm. But we beg you, cease tormenting us and let us leave this cursed house in peace. A sinister chuckle echoed through the room. I see now, it is you who murdered me. Emily's eyes flew open to see Eleanor's ghostly visage hovering before them, eyes blazing. Sarah pressed on. What you say cannot be true. We have only just arrived. Please, share your story so we may understand. The candles dimmed further, leaving only the spirit's glowing white aura to illuminate the room. Lies. Eleanor rasped. You are one of them, my family who condemned me. You will suffer for your betrayal. The ghost swooped toward Sarah and Emily. An icy wave of unadulterated rage and hatred washed over them. Emily screamed, but no sound emerged. The cold wrapped around her throat in an icy grip, choking the life from her. Darkness encroached on her vision. And then, suddenly, the crushing pressure ceased. Emily gasped for breath as the candles relit with a roar. Beside her, Sarah was doubled over wheezing. The ghost was gone. After witnessing the depth of Eleanor's fury and anguish, her mother's composure had finally cracked. "Forgive me, Emily," she cried. "I thought if we could just communicate." Emily clutched her mother's shaking hands. "There's nothing to forgive. We had to try." But inwardly, Emily's heart sank. Speaking directly with the spirit had only empowered Eleanor, giving her license to physically lash out. Her rage was beyond reason. They had failed to pacify the ghost. Now their only hope was to find some way to vanquish her before Eleanor's spectral hands squeezed the life from them once and for all. Chapter 8: A Desperate Escape. Emily could still feel the icy grip of Eleanor's hands around her throat as she stood with her mother in the aftermath of the séance. The ghost's unbridled rage was etched in her mind. Reasoning was futile. Eleanor would only be satisfied when their broken bodies joined the spirits trapped within Blackthorn Hall's endless corridors. Sarah's face was grave. "We need to leave this instant," she said firmly. "Gather only what you need." Emily did not have to be told twice. She rushed to her room, throwing clothes haphazardly into her suitcase with trembling hands. Only the essentials. They needed to travel light if they were to outrun the spectral threat. Downstairs, Sarah loaded bags into the car while keeping a watchful eye on the manor's darkened windows and doors. The drone of the engine was a small comfort, proof of their impending escape. Emily took one last look at the crumbling walls that had been a shelter and then a prison over the past weeks. Somewhere in those shadows, the ghost still lingered, rage building within her ruined form. Emily could only pray they would be far down the winding road before Eleanor realized her prey was fleeing. At last, she turned away and hurried to the running car. Throwing her bag in the back, Emily dove into the passenger seat. Sarah was already behind the wheel, hands clenched white-knuckled around it like a lifeline. The tires spit gravel as they peeled out of the driveway and onto the lonely road. Only when the gloomy facade of Blackthorn Hall was swallowed up in the gloom of dusk did Emily exhale the breath she'd been holding. They watched the last traces of daylight fade from the sky in silence as the car sped on. Soon they would need to stop and rest, but neither could stand the thought of sleep's vulnerability. Not yet. As the black of full night enveloped the car, Sarah finally spoke. "We should reach the village in well before dawn." She glanced at Emily, face etched with worry. "Try to sleep if you can, love. We're safe now." Emily nodded mutely, despite the cold shiver crawling up her spine. Safe was far from how she felt speeding through the night's void. She strained her eyes gazing out into the darkness, half expecting to glimpse Eleanor's glowing visage drifting over the misty moors, trailing the car like a spectral bloodhound. Gradually, despite her fear, Emily's exhaustion overpowered her. Lulled by the steady hum of the engine, she slipped into a fitful doze. In her dreams she found herself back at Blackthorn Hall, wandering alone through lightless corridors. A shapeless evil presence lurked just out of sight, its unseen eyes boring into Emily's back. She walked on as an icy wind stirred up leaves and dust around her feet. Each step was a struggle, her limbs leaden. Glancing back over her shoulder, Emily gasped. There, framed in the corridor's arched window, was the ghostly silhouette of a veiled woman drifting closer. Emily tried to scream, but only a choked whisper emerged. She turned and ran, the clicking footsteps of the spirit echoing close behind. Up ahead, a door creaked open, warm light spilling out into the hall. If only she could reach it in time. Emily awoke with a start to find herself on the moonlit road, safely in the speeding car. Trembling, she glanced at her mother, but Sarah was slumped motionless in the driver's seat. As Emily watched in dawning horror, Sarah's body contorted, her head creaking around unnaturally until she faced Emily. Her eyes were now empty black voids. "You'll never leave Blackthorn Hall," came the ghost's mocking voice from Sarah's motionless lips. Bile rose in Emily's throat. This couldn't be real, still had to be part of the nightmare from which she hadn't fully awakened. She fumbled desperately for the door handle as not Sarah's hands reached for her throat once more. Emily spilled out onto the road, rolling to soften the impact before lurching back to her feet. The car continued speeding into the night with Eleanor at the wheel. Still half convinced she was dreaming, Emily began stumbling after it, calling for her mother. Suddenly blinding light washed over her. An oncoming truck blared its horn, squealing to a stop just yards away. The gruff driver leaned out his window. "What in blazes are you doing out here alone, lass? Nearly ran you down." Heart still pounding, Emily managed to rasp out something about her mother being in danger. She pointed a trembling hand in the direction the car had gone. Looking concerned, the driver helped her into his passenger seat, then took off down the road. "You just try to relax now. We'll sort this out." Emily nodded mutely, struggling to slow her panicked breathing. She clenched her eyes shut, praying when she opened them again this nightmare chase would be over. A short time later the truck rounded a bend, and there ahead was the car, lying on its side in a roadside ditch. The driver pulled over, turning on his hazards before hurrying to the vehicle. Emily followed on still shaky legs. "Your mum's still inside," he yelled. Emily's heart seized until she peered into the shattered window to see her mother slumped over the steering wheel, bleeding but breathing. "It's okay, you're safe now," she whispered, tears of relief stinging her eyes as she reached for Sarah's hand. Her mother's eyes fluttered open, dazed but aware. The ghost was gone, at least for the moment. As the truck driver called emergency services, Emily clung to her mother's hand, knowing they had narrowly escaped becoming two more lost souls wandering the endless halls of Blackthorn Hall for all eternity. Chapter 9: The Ultimate Sacrifice. Emily refused to leave her mother's hospital bedside in the days following the accident. Though Sarah's injuries were not life-threatening, the crash had left her weak and shaken. Worse still was the chilling knowledge that their desperate escape from Blackthorn Hall had failed. "I saw her, Eleanor was there in the car with us," Emily insisted, recounting her vivid nightmare. Sarah nodded solemnly and gripped her daughter's hand. "I believe you. That vengeful spirit is tied to us now, she won't rest until..." Her voice trailed off, but Emily could see the unspoken fear in her mother's eyes. Eleanor would keep tormenting them until she fulfilled her murderous intent. In the quiet moments when Sarah drifted into fitful sleep, Emily's mind raced with possibilities. Daniel had said banishing Eleanor required uncovering the true details of her painful demise and bringing them to light. But Daniel remained missing, and Emily and Sarah were running out of time. On the third day, the nurses informed Emily her mother would be discharged from the hospital shortly. Dread crept into Emily's heart. She knew they couldn't simply run again, the ghost would always find them. But the thought of returning to Blackthorn Hall paralyzed her. That night, Emily stirred from restless dreams to find a familiar presence standing over the hospital bed. Eleanor's ghostly face stared down at her, pale lips twisted into a mocking grin. Emily tried to scream, but no sound emerged. "It is time you returned home," came the spectral voice in Emily's mind. Sarah, deeply sedated, did not stir as the spirit's icy grip closed around Emily's arm. Before she could resist, the hospital room dissolved away into darkness. When Emily's vision cleared, she found herself once again before the looming facade of Blackthorn Hall beneath the night sky. The ghost still clutched her in an icy vice. Emily's breaths came in panicked gasps. "Please, I'll do anything, just don't hurt my mother," she begged. Eleanor's spectre let out a shrill, mirthless cackle. Your fates are sealed. But perhaps if you beg pitifully enough, I will spare you some suffering before the end. With that, the spirit released its hold on Emily and vanished, leaving her trembling alone before the doors of the manor. They creaked open slowly, beckoning her into the hungry darkness within. Emily had no choice but to enter. She groped along the familiar halls, now cloaked in shadow. All was deathly silent except for the frantic pounding of her heart. What do you want from me? Emily cried out to the unseen spirit. I'll do anything to save my mother. A chill wind stirred, extinguishing Emily's candle. Eleanor's voice slithered out of the darkness. As you wish. I shall spare your dear mother if you offer yourself to take her place. Remain here with me, for all eternity. The spirit stepped out of the shadows, tendrils of inky hair writhing about her face. She extended an icy, withered hand. Emily hesitated only a moment before taking it. If this sacrifice would save her mother, so be it. She would not allow Sarah to suffer for her mistake of coming to this accursed house. I accept your bargain, Emily declared through chattering teeth. Now swear to me my mother will be freed. A terrible smile contorted Eleanor's face. You have my vow. Now, embrace your eternal fate. Cackling, the ghost enveloped Emily in her icy grip. Emily screamed as the chill penetrated to her very core, freezing her blood and stealing the breath from her lungs. Her life force ebbed as Eleanor's malice flowed into her. Just as Emily teetered on the brink of death, a deafening bang shattered the darkness. A blaze of light flooded the foyer, blinding her. Eleanor's shriek of rage pierced her ears as the spirit released Emily and retreated into the shadows with a blast of frigid air. Gasping, Emily blinked away the black spots in her vision to see her mother standing in the open doorway, face hardened with grim determination. She clutched an ancient tome, Daniel Whitlock's diary. Quickly, come here. Sarah cried, beckoning urgently. Emily scrambled to her mother's side. Sarah drew a line of salt across the threshold, warding off the spirit's pursuit. For now, they were safe. But Eleanor's unearthly howl still echoed from the manor's depths. Sarah turned to Emily, face streaked with tears born of fear and anguish, and pulled her daughter fiercely into her embrace. I won't let her take you, Sarah whispered through sobs. Emily clung to her mother. They had won a momentary respite, but the harrowing ordeal was far from over. Now armed with Daniel's knowledge, they would make their final stand against Eleanor's vengeful spirit. Here is a 1041-word draft for Chapter 10. Chapter 10, Resolution and Redemption. Sarah refused to release her grip on Emily, as if fearing the ghost might reappear any moment to snatch her daughter back into Blackthorn Hall's sinister grasp. Only once the first rays of dawn began filtering over the hills did Sarah's trembling subside. She held Emily at arm's length, scrutinizing her face as if reassuring herself her daughter was flesh and blood, not some specter. When I realized Eleanor had taken you, I forced the nurses to discharge me, Sarah explained, her voice still raw. Then I went straight to Daniel Whitlock's cottage, found his journal. I knew it was our last chance. Emily nodded silently, hardly believing they had escaped the manor and Eleanor's wrath, if only temporarily. Peering past her mother's shoulder, she glimpsed movement at the cottage window. Daniel himself stared back at them, very much alive. Sarah followed her gaze. Ah, I suppose I should explain that as well. Daniel is alive and safe, has been in hiding since he gave you his diary. He feared Eleanor might come for him. Seeing Emily's shocked expression, Daniel emerged fully into the doorway, shame written across his deeply lined face. Forgive an old fool, he implored. I thought uncovering the truth from afar would be enough, but I see now just how gravely I underestimated the forces we face. Daniel's weathered hands trembled, but his eyes burned with renewed conviction. "Come inside, we haven't a moment to lose." The three of them gathered around Daniel's cluttered table where he had already laid out the ancient diary, a map of Blackthorn Hall, and his many notes. Emily recounted her latest harrowing encounter with Eleanor and the narrow escape. Daniel nodded grimly. "You were wise not to accept that deceitful bargain, though I suspect you knew as much. Eleanor relinquishes her prey to no one." He gestured to the materials spread before them. "While in hiding here, I have pieced together more of the puzzle. The injustice done to Eleanor goes deeper than we knew." According to Daniel's research, Eleanor had borne a child in secret just prior to being imprisoned. Emily listened in horror as he described Eleanor's family ripping the newborn babe from her arms before locking her away to die alone. "They murdered an innocent child, all to shield the family name from perceived shame," Daniel spat in disgust. "Only with the truth exposed can Eleanor's spirit find peace and the curse on Blackthorn Hall finally be lifted." Sarah's jaw was set with determination. "Then that is what we must do. If we hold a séance on the grounds and reveal the full injustice done to Eleanor and her child, will that be enough to appease her?" Daniel nodded. "I believe so, though we must take care. Eleanor will resist our efforts with all her malevolent power. But if we can restore Eleanor's dignity through the truth, her spirit may finally be freed." As dusk fell, Sarah, Emily and Daniel solemnly marched back onto the grounds of Blackthorn Hall. Daniel had warned that Eleanor would sense their presence immediately, so they must prepare for her vengeful onslaught. True enough, as they approached the decrepit gates, a bone-chilling wind stirred. Emily shook uncontrollably, though not from cold. The darkness within the manor had awoken once more. "Remember, we come not to condemn, but to seek truth and justice," Daniel reminded them as he lit the candles in a circle and began chanting in Latin. An unnatural wail sounded from within the manor walls. The temperature plunged. Emily felt the unmistakable electric chill of the spirit's approach. Eleanor manifested before them, wisps of inky hair writhing about her face. "You return only to face death," she rasped, her empty eyes burning with rage. "Eleanor, we know the full truth of what happened here," Sarah responded calmly. "We know about your child, and the innocent lives lost." The windows of Blackthorn Hall exploded outwards, raining shards of glass upon them. But Sarah did not flinch. "Their cruelty and lies can no longer be hidden. Only by acknowledging the truth can we all be free." An inhuman shriek rent the air. But even as Eleanor's spectre swirled and raged before them, Emily sensed the words had struck some fragile part of the spirit that still clung to humanity. "We are not here to harm you, Eleanor," Emily found herself saying. "Only to make amends on behalf of those who wronged you. Please, let us help you find peace." The wind slowly died down around them. Emily now glimpsed the face of a young woman beneath the ghostly veil, her eyes welling with ethereal tears. When Eleanor spoke again, her voice was heavy with sorrow. "My child, they took her from me." The spirit's rage had dissolved into profound grief. Emily extended a trembling hand. Eleanor's icy touch sent shocks through her, but she did not pull away. "Her memory can live on through us," Emily vowed. "Our lives are fleeting, but your spirits are eternal. Someday, you will find each other again." A calm fell over the haunted grounds. Eleanor lifted her face to the black sky as if seeing some distant light invisible to the living. At long last, her centuries of pain and rage seemed to melt away. The first light of dawn peeked over the hills, banishing the last shadows from Blackthorn Hall. When it had passed, Eleanor Blackthorn's tormented ghost was gone. In the coming days, Daniel worked to turn the manor into a museum honoring Eleanor's memory and preserving the dark history so none would forget. Though changed forever by their ordeal, Sarah and Emily found peace once more. But sometimes, when Emily wandered the restored gardens in solitude, she could swear the air held a hint of wildflowers, and a faint, kindly whisper followed her steps.